Well, a 2021 international scientific study has proven that forests across the mountainous regions of Africa store far more carbon than was previously known. Well, our Environmental Correspondent Laila Johnson-Salami has carried out research on the carbon concentration of these forests and what this means for Africa. In this report, she proposes carbon financing as a possible way to protect these ecosystems and analyzes Nigeria's journey into carbon markets.
Afro-montane forests, common to the mountainous regions of Africa and the southern Arabian Peninsula, are both understudied and underreported. In the history of ecology, not much has been known scientifically about these ecosystems. But in 2021, the world became more aware of their significance after an international study published in the online science journal Nature found that Afro-montane forests store more carbon per hectare than the world's largest rainforest, the Amazon. A remarkable prospect, sure, but what exactly do these findings mean?
A carbon store is simply the amount of carbon locked up in the biomass or the soils of any ecosystem, whether it's a forest or a grassland. Firstly, it highlights the value of these montane systems, which are quite threatened, being degraded overall.
Ngelnyaki Forest Reserve in Taraba State is the only montane forest plot in Nigeria featured in this comprehensive study, and one of the only surviving plots left in the country. According to the study, African tropical montane forests contain an average of just under 150 tons of carbon per hectare, which is approximately 2/3 greater than the last estimates given by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change.
The paper has two main messages. The mountain forests of Africa have high carbon, more than we expected, or more than the previous literature had shown. Of course, there were few studies published on this before. And the second part of the message of the paper is that the deforestation rates are higher on the mountains and the lowlands. So we need more action, more conservation attention.
One way to protect these highly threatened habitats is through carbon financing. According to the CDP, an international not-for-profit that runs the Environmental Impact Global Disclosure System, Africa is responsible for just 3.8% of global carbon emissions. Yet, some of the worst effects of climate change are felt here. And as emissions have no borders, African ecosystems have been storing carbon and other greenhouse gases for some of the largest global emitters since the start of the industrial age. Now, as the world struggles to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, the 2021 UN Climate Change Conference, COP26, finally set guidelines for carbon markets to be regulated under the Paris Agreement, creating conditions for markets to grow and thrive.
To first understand what the carbon market is and what carbon trading is all about. We all agree that we need to reduce carbon emissions, and governments, since the Paris Agreement, have set quotas, that kind of limits the amount of carbon, you can emit. And if you are staying within that target, then you don't have a penalty or a tax, or a carbon tax to pay. But if you go above that penalty or that target, then you have a tax or penalty to pay. Now, if you're able to stay within or lower than that, then you have carbon credits. Okay, so if you have carbon credits, the carbon markets or carbon finance ascribes values to those credits so that you can trade them.
Robust verification processes by third-party verifiers are an important component of carbon markets. Gold Standard, developed in 2003 under the leadership of the World Wildlife Fund and other international NGOs, verifies carbon credits traded in the voluntary carbon market.
Rather than choosing projects specifically, Gold Standard identifies where carbon finance is most needed with credibility. So we define the eligible activity types and then set the specific rules and requirements that projects need to follow to gain gold standard certification. And then projects come to us seeking certification generally because they understand that using gold standard can help them deliver more impact, which the buyers of the credits value. Quite a few projects are undergoing gold standard certification in Nigeria. All of these projects fall into what we call community service activities, those that provide clean energy, clean water, clean cooking solutions to local communities. In addition to the social benefits, this project reduces wood consumption, one of the main drivers of land use change in Nigeria, allowing for natural recovery of forests or reforestation.
To maximize the potential of carbon markets through Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, countries like Nigeria will need to develop carbon mechanism frameworks to support this. According to Nigeria's Minister of State for Environment, Barrister Sharon Ikeazo, the Ministry of Environment is currently in the process of establishing a long-term framework for this, as this is mandatory in Nigeria's Climate Change Act 2021.
While the framework is established, I think there are different tools that the Nigerian government can use. For example, the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which is the International Carbon Trading Scheme, where increasing number of governments are reaching out to gold standard to see if they can use the platform to ensure that they are trading credible carbon assets according to the rules of Article 6.
The way to go about it for Nigeria is to look at all the forests that we have. Let's ensure that we can conserve them, and let's have a program for replanting the forest, so that the forests we have are carbon sinks. The African forest can actually absorb more carbon than even the Amazon forest. So one of the things that we should do is to publicize this fact, so that everybody knows. And the fact that we have a lot of the montane forest in Africa is also an additional benefit that can boost our carbon credentials.
Mr. Samaila Zubairu is the president and CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, a development finance institution established in 2007. The AFC is the first African supranational to have issued a green bond.
So a green bond is essentially a financing instrument that is targeting either renewable energy, climate, or social projects. We are looking at the whole march towards energy transition within the significant energy deficit that exists in Africa. Most Africans, their use of energy, is for cooking and heating. It's not for industrialization, which is why it is very important that there has to be a mechanism, for compensating them, and providing them alternative sources, than the forest and the firewood that they use.
While the world can speak about the energy transition for Africa is for us to limit how we are depleting our forests for agriculture and for firewood. We need to have a plan in place which involves the government, the private sector, and the people who are living in the communities coming together in a systematic way. And then you can design a plan that involves these stakeholders.
We have been approached by some mountain reservation projects, and we're very keen to partner with them, along with several other such initiatives that seek to ensure that we can preserve, the forest that we know significantly absorb carbon. I think somewhere in Mambila, so we are adopting that particular project. We're going to give it our full support. So as Nigeria, we can choose to do different, which is choose to use natural gas, never to use coal, choose to use solar and wind, and then ensure that we conserve the forest that we have to get the maximum carbon credits from them.
A key aim of the carbon market under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is to help countries achieve their nationally determined contributions. These are commitments made by countries to reduce emissions and adapt to the impacts of climate change. In 2021, Nigeria submitted updated NDCs to the Paris Agreement, vowing to reduce carbon emissions by 20% by 2030 and 45% with the help of climate financing.
It's very important for us to have the right capital. But it's not just having the right capital, but that capital should come to institutions that are on the ground and doing the work. And there is a number of us that are credible. So right now there's a lot of climate pledge money, but they're circling in the global markets. Most of them are going to other regions, Asia, where you can chase more carbon, but there hasn't been sufficient investor interest in Africa because a lot of the large institutional investors don't even have allocations for Africa.
With alarmingly few forests left in Nigeria, carbon financing is one way to protect and restore this biodiversity. However, it is clear that this innovative mechanism alone is not enough. Current agricultural practices continue to threaten forests on the Mambilla Plateau. So communities surrounding these forests must be supported and empowered. Support for scientific research on African ecology is also critical, for the value of these ecosystems to be recognized. Ngelnyaki Forest Reserve is reportedly the most plant species-rich montane forest in Nigeria, with great carbon sink potential. Without essential habitats like this, it is a fact that humanity and other life forms will struggle to survive. Laila Johnson-Salami, Arise News.
Well, Laila Johnson-Salami is still with us to reflect on this detailed and informative nature report and the painstaking effort at putting them together. Laila, good job again.
Thank you. And I think that's why I tried to stay a bit quiet before we went into this one, because I really wanted us to showcase the potential of these forests. I mean, Afro-montane forests can store more carbon per hectare than the entire Amazon rainforest. Now, that fact alone is huge. The Amazon is known as the world's largest and most biodiverse rainforest. And here on this continent, we have forests that are storing more carbon per hectare. Why isn't the carbon financing then coming here?
But then it looks to me like, on a general note, that we're under siege because of those hunting for woods. I mean, even if we have to mention, it's all in the news, the Chinese especially.
Yeah.
The Lebanese are now involved, the Koreans, from Nigeria to Cameroon, everywhere. Are we doing enough to bring the full wrath of the law, on this matter, or are government officials complicit in some of these things?
And that's a very valid question. I mean, in a couple weeks' time, I'm going to be putting a report together on the rosewood trade in Nigeria. Rosewood is this hard, strong wood that is loved for furniture, but the huge demand for rosewood means that there's hardly any rosewood left, and the felling of rosewood is illegal. If you go to Taraba State, for example, most of Nigeria's rosewood since 2016 has come from Taraba State. All down the roads as you're driving, you're still seeing rosewood logs lined up, and you're like, what's even left for you to still cut down?
Yeah.
So yes, in order for you to chase finance, you also have to be able to prove that certain projects are protected. One way in which you can do that is through enforcing your laws and updating your laws. Our laws are not strong enough. Of course, there are people complicit, actors right from the very forests all the way to the ports, to government, wherever the case may be. There are actors complicit across government. There are actors complicit. And this is the part that we have to become honest about, because there's no way that this can continue to happen if we're not there's no way that this can stop, if we're not going to be honest. There are people who are complicit in roles that they just should not be complicit in. And it's just a fact of the matter. Your foreign criminal networks are not just the foreign criminal networks.
Exactly.
There are actors all around you. You have to ask questions about several agencies that are supposed to be either putting this to a stop or making sure that certain things don't go past the ports. You have to ask several questions. And yes, it does have to stop if we are to chase more carbon financing. But if you want it to stop, you have to provide alternative livelihoods for communities surrounding these forests. Until that's done, you protect one plot. What's to say that just by protecting one plot, they're not going to go to the next plot and start logging from another plot? It has to be a rounded approach to livelihood, to economic growth, in order for us to actually protect and save our forests. Less than 10% of Nigeria is forest today. Like that's really, really low. We've lost most of our forests.
That's key. At the risk of sounding lighthearted, I mean, the more we deforest, the more we allow deforestation, the more we lose those bushmeats, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, even for preservation.
Why did I know Steve was going
for preservation.
What more can be done, though, within the African continent? Because, like the lady rightfully said, the climate pledge, there's a lot of climate pledge money, and it's not coming to Africa, even though it's supposed to come into Africa. What more can be done? We were discussing earlier, you talked about, the Nigeria's Climate Change Act, which will, hopefully create a framework that could tax companies or even individuals. What more could be done within the African continent to get more carbon finance?
So there's a lot of publicization that has to be done. For example, the fact that we now know that Afro-montane forests store more carbon per hectare than the Amazon rainforest. These are selling points. That's number one. Number two, we have to start looking at the situation in a very well-rounded way. What exactly is the issue and how do we go about changing this? One way is, of course, through carbon financing. Now, there are several tools under carbon financing. You have the carbon markets. Under the carbon markets, you have the voluntary carbon market. You also have the compliance market. So I'll give you an example. The EU have the largest compliance market in the world. It covers about 40% of the EU's greenhouse gas emissions, and it's worth over 600 billion euros. Absolutely huge. Now, how that operates is that for a particular region, you have a cap, and you say your only amount X, and so industries are only allowed to emit a certain amount of carbon. You go above that, you get taxed. You stay below that, you have carbon credits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. By developing these systems, we can put ourselves in a position where we can actually start to chase financing for the protection of these forests. And then that financing can then be divided between members of the local communities, NGOs that are on the ground offering this support, and the government at the same time. But without that incentive, this is going to continue to happen. If you tell communities that, look, we're going to pay you to keep your forests intact, then there's so much forest to save and to restore. But if there isn't that incentive, this will 100% continue, and that's the saddest part. But carbon markets propose a unique opportunity. It's about how do we now tap into that, And the good news is the Climate Change Act was finally passed into law barely a week after COP26 last year, and that gives room for the development of a framework for carbon trading and carbon markets, which is great news. And our Minister of State for Environment, Barrister Sharon Ikezo, she is all over carbon markets at the moment, and she's spoken about it quite a lot. And they're really trying to put that framework together. When will that be ready? We don't know, but there are still options in the meantime. The voluntary carbon market is there. Governments can make use of the voluntary carbon market.
Right.
As always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, Laila.